AITA for refusing to babysit my sister's kids for several weeks while she is on a baby moon with her boyfriend. I 28 female have a sister, Jamie 38 female, who has 3 kids, Melanie 11 female, Sarah 8 female, and Carl 5 male. For as long as I can remember, Jamie and I have never really been close. It is not that we hated each other, but the age gap between us created a natural distance. By the time I was in middle school, she was already out of the house, navigating adulthood, marriage, and eventually, motherhood. While I was dealing with teenage drama, high school exams, and my first experiences with independence, she was juggling diapers, temper tantrums, and family responsibilities. Our lives moved in such different directions that it felt like we never really intersected in any meaningful way. By the time I reached my early 20s, I was focused on finishing school, figuring out my career, and enjoying my newfound independence. Meanwhile, Jamie was deep in the trenches of raising 3 young kids, struggling through an increasingly unhappy marriage, and constantly venting about how exhausted she was. She was the type of person who always seemed to have a new problem, always needing someone to step in and help her, but never actually taking responsibility for the choices she made. Our family, especially my aunt and my mother, were always stepping in to rescue her, whether it was offering to babysit, helping her financially, or simply listening to her endless complaints about how unfair life was. I learned early on that getting too involved in Jamie's issues meant being dragged into her constant chaos, so I started keeping my distance. Jamie was married for over a decade to her now ex-husband, a man I honestly felt bad for. He was a decent guy, a quiet, hard-working type who clearly loved his kids and tried to make the marriage work, even when it was obvious Jamie had checked out long before the divorce. Their marriage officially ended about 6 months ago after Jamie cheated on him with her current boyfriend, Daniel, 62M. Yes, you read that correctly. My 38-year-old sister left her husband, the father of her children, to be with a man who is literally old enough to be our father. And let me be clear, it was not love at first sight or some grand romance. It was painfully obvious to everyone that Jamie thought Daniel was wealthy and was hoping he would provide her with the luxurious, easy lifestyle she had always dreamed of. The problem? Daniel is not wealthy. In fact, he is barely scraping by. The whole situation was almost comical in a sad way. Jamie had torched her entire life, her marriage, her stability, and even her children's sense of security, for a fantasy that did not exist. Now she is stuck with a man who has to work double shifts just to keep up with their expenses, and she is learning the hard way that financial security does not magically appear just because you latch onto someone older. Meanwhile, her kids are struggling with the massive upheaval in their lives. Their dad, who had been their primary source of stability, was suddenly out of the house, replaced by a man they barely knew. It was messy, and everyone in the family knew it. To say that Jamie's kids are a handful would be the understatement of the century. I know people like to say, oh, they're just kids, but these kids are a lot. They are loud, destructive, and have absolutely no concept of boundaries. I tried to be the fun, involved aunt when they were younger, but the last time they came over to my place, 3 years ago, it was a complete disaster that cemented my decision to never have children. That day, Melanie, who was 8 at the time, decided that my apartment was the perfect place to play some chaotic game that involved throwing a ball across the living room. I repeatedly told her to stop, but she ignored me, giggling as she continued to toss it back and forth with Sarah. One particularly bad throw sent the ball flying straight into one of my favorite vases, a beautiful, delicate piece that had sentimental value to me. It shattered instantly, pieces of ceramic flying everywhere. Melanie's reaction? A shrug, followed by, oops. No apology, no remorse, just indifference. Meanwhile, Sarah, who was 5 at the time, had found one of my permanent markers and decided that my UGG boots, my brand new UGG boots, needed some decorating. By the time I noticed what she was doing, the damage was done. Bright blue scribbles covered the soft suede, completely ruining them. When I confronted her, she just laughed and said, I was making them pretty, as if that somehow made it okay. And where was Jamie during all of this? On my couch, scrolling through her phone, completely unconcerned. When I pointed out the chaos her kids were causing, she just sighed dramatically and said, they're just kids, relax. No apologies, no attempts to discipline them, nothing. That was the moment I had an epiphany. I did not want kids. Ever. And I definitely did not want to be around these kids more than absolutely necessary. Since then, I have kept my distance. I still see them at family gatherings, and I make an effort to be civil, but I have drawn clear boundaries. I do not babysit. I do not invite them over. I do not involve myself in Jamie's parenting struggles. It is just easier that way. Fast forward to this week, and Jamie is now pregnant again, this time with Daniel's child. Despite their financial struggles, she and Daniel have somehow decided that going on a baby moon is a priority. Let me repeat that, they are struggling financially, yet they are spending money they do not have on a trip. And instead of budgeting for a babysitter, Jamie just assumed that she could dump her kids on someone for free. Yesterday, she called me out of nowhere. I barely had time to say hello before she launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech about how I was the best aunt in the world and how her kids were absolute darlings, who I wouldn't even notice were there. The moment she started buttering me up, I knew she was about to ask for something. When she finally got to the point and asked me to watch her kids for the duration of her trip, I did not hesitate. I immediately said no. Not only do I not want to watch her kids, but I cannot. I am getting my degree online, and I need to fly out for my graduation ceremony. This is a huge milestone for me, something I have worked toward for years, and I am not about to put my life on hold to accommodate Jamie's bad planning. Jamie, of course, was not having it. At first, she tried to persuade me, saying it would be so easy, and that the kids would be on their best behavior. I shut that down immediately. Then, her tone shifted. Suddenly, I was the heartless, selfish sister who could not have a little compassion for her poor, pregnant sister. She went on a full-blown rant about how hard her life was, how exhausted she was, and how she just needed a break. She painted herself as the victim, completely ignoring the fact that she put herself in this situation. At that point, I had enough. I was done being guilt-tripped for not wanting to be her unpaid babysitter. So I told her, if you want someone to work for free, maybe you should get a job instead of jumping from man to man, hoping they'll bankroll your lifestyle. And then I hung up. Ever since then, she has been bombarding me with texts. Some are angry, accusing me of being selfish and heartless. Others are desperate, practically begging me to reconsider. Even our aunt, the one who hosts the occasional family dinners, reached out and suggested I be the bigger person and just help Jamie out. I am standing firm in my decision, but the guilt is creeping in. I know her kids did not ask to be born into this mess, and it is not their fault that their mother makes terrible choices. But at the same time, I refuse to be manipulated into taking on a responsibility that is not mine. Update 1. Last night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw Jamie's name. I sighed. At this point, I had already been ignoring her texts for hours, letting them pile up like unread spam emails. But something about the way this one was worded, short, clipped, and lacking the usual whining or pleading, made me open it. She was upset. Apparently, my refusal to babysit had completely ruined her plans. She and Daniel had to cancel their precious baby moon because I had rudely denied what she called an amazing opportunity to spend time with her kids. But here's the kicker, not everything from the cancelled trip was fully refunded. Some non-refundable deposits were lost, and she had already paid for certain bookings that she couldn't get her money back on. And in Jamie's mind, that was entirely my fault. So, naturally, she decided that I should compensate her for the financial loss. And not just that, she expected me to pay for a fully funded trip to Disney for her, Daniel, and the kids. She even went so far as to break down the costs, sending me multiple links to hotels, ticket prices, and dining plans. It was an absurd demand, but she was completely serious. And just when I thought she could not get more delusional, she attached more links to a list of baby-related items she wanted me to buy for her unborn child. Expensive Japanese brand diapers, baby clothes, tiny designer shoes that made no sense, what baby needs mini Asics that cost a bomb, and other newborn essentials totaling over $500. I stared at my phone in disbelief. This was beyond entitlement. This was next-level manipulation. I did not text back. I didn't even give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I just blocked her. That should have been the end of it. It should have ended there. But Jamie always finds a way to take things further. A little while later, my phone started ringing. It was Daniel. I ignored it. He called again. And again. I didn't pick up. If Jamie thought I was going to sit through a lecture from the man who willingly got involved with her mess, she was out of her mind. Then, at around midnight, there was a loud knock at my door. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe some late-night neighbor being careless. But then it came again, more insistent this time. My stomach twisted. A part of me knew who it was before I even reached the peephole. It was Jamie. And she wasn't alone. She had brought Melanie. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Melanie, my 11-year-old niece, stood next to her, looking tired and confused. Jamie, on the other hand, had the nerve to look annoyed, like I was the problem. I barely had time to react before she turned on her heel and walked off, leaving Melanie standing there. No explanation. No warning. Just abandonment. It took a solid few seconds before I snapped back to reality. Jamie had dropped her child off in the middle of the night. I opened the door, half expecting Jamie to come back, to at least pretend like she had made some mistake. But no. She was already gone. Her car had pulled away from my driveway, leaving me standing there with an 11-year-old who had no idea what was going on. Melanie looked up at me, her face a mix of exhaustion and uncertainty. She was clutching a small overnight bag, like she knew she was being dumped somewhere but wasn't given the details. It hit me then, Jamie hadn't told her the full story. She had probably spun some lie about how I had agreed to take her in for the night, just like she had lied about the Disney trip, the babysitting, and everything else. I exhaled, stepping aside and motioning for her to come in. She hesitated before shuffling inside, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't blame her. This wasn't her fault. She didn't ask to be a pawn in Jamie's ridiculous schemes. I shut the door behind us, my mind racing. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I had two options. Option 1, I call the police. Jamie literally abandoned her daughter on my doorstep in the middle of the night with zero warning. This was neglect. Maybe even abandonment. And if I got the authorities involved, Jamie would absolutely face some kind of consequence for it. But Melanie might also suffer in the process. The last thing I wanted was for her to get caught in a situation that could make her life harder than it already was. Option 2, I go to Jamie's house and sort this out myself. But knowing her, she would either pretend I was the villain in all this or double down and try to convince me that this was somehow my responsibility now. And worst of all, she might just refuse to take Melanie back, leaving me stuck in a situation I had no part in creating. Neither option felt good, but I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let this slide. Because if I did, Jamie would take it as permission to pull something even worse in the future. Update 2. I know I said calling the police was an option, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, not with Melanie standing there looking so lost. She was just a kid, caught in the middle of her mother's reckless choices, and I refused to let her suffer because Jamie couldn't get her life together. So, I went with option 2. I grabbed my keys, told Melanie to get in the car, and drove straight to Jamie's house. The entire ride was silent. Melanie just stared out the window, her small hands folded in her lap, her shoulders drawn in like she was trying to make herself as small as possible. I could tell she was exhausted, but more than that, she was used to this. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She didn't even seem surprised. That realization made my stomach sink. When I pulled up to Jamie's house, I wasn't shocked to see the place completely dark. Not a single light on. I parked in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel for a moment, trying to swallow the anger bubbling in my chest. Then I stepped out and knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, my frustration building with each second that passed. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to let Jamie ignore the mess she had made. Just as I was about to pound on the door one last time, the porch light flickered on, and the door swung open. Jamie stood there in a robe, her hair messy, her expression a mix of irritation and exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, like I was the one who had done something wrong. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I said, "Take your daughter back." Jamie rolled her eyes, crossing her arms, muttering something under her breath about how I was being dramatic. And then she did something that made my blood run cold. She looked past me, straight at Melanie, and said, "I told you to stay inside until morning." That was when it hit me. Jamie had planned this. She had fully expected me to just keep Melanie overnight, like it was some prearranged deal, like I was some unpaid, involuntary babysitter who would just fall in line. Worse, she hadn't even told Melanie. She had dropped her off, left her standing outside in the cold, and driven away without a single word to her own daughter. I turned to look at Melanie, and the expression on her face gutted me. She looked like she had just been slapped, like the last shred of hope she had for her mother had just been crushed. She had no idea she was being abandoned like that. That was it. I lost it. I didn't care if the whole neighborhood heard. I tore into Jamie, laying out every single thing that was wrong with what she had just done. I called her out on her irresponsibility, her selfishness, the way she used people without a second thought. I told her that she was hurting her own children and that she needed to grow the hell up and start acting like a mother instead of expecting everyone else to pick up the pieces for her. Jamie barely reacted. She just sighed dramatically, waved a hand, and said she was too tired for this before reaching for the door, like she was going to shut it in my face and go back to sleep, like this entire thing was just a mild inconvenience to her. But then, the real twist happened. Daniel appeared behind her, looking groggy, rubbing his eyes. He was clearly half asleep, probably woken up by my yelling. He blinked a few times, his gaze shifting from Jamie to me to Melanie, and then he frowned. His voice was hoarse when he spoke, but what he said made everything click into place. He asked, "Why is she here?" "I thought she was staying at your sister's." That was it. That was the moment I knew. Jamie had lied to him too. She had told him that I had agreed to keep Melanie overnight. She had dropped her daughter off at my house in the middle of the night without telling anyone the truth, not me, not Melanie, not even Daniel. For the first time, Jamie looked uncomfortable. I saw the brief flicker of panic in her expression, the way she shifted on her feet like she was trying to come up with a new excuse on the spot. But before she could say anything, Daniel let out a long, frustrated sigh and rubbed his face, like this was the last thing he wanted to deal with. Then, before I could even react, he was the one who told Melanie to come inside. And for the first time, I saw hesitation on Jamie's face, like she hadn't expected him to care. Melanie stood frozen for a second, her eyes darting between me, Jamie, and Daniel, before she slowly stepped forward and crossed the threshold. She didn't say a word. She didn't even look at Jamie. She just walked inside, like she had been through this before and knew there was no point in making a scene. Jamie just stood there, caught between embarrassment and anger, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the right words. Daniel didn't even look at me when he muttered, "Sorry about this," and shut the door. I stood on that porch for a long moment, the night air cold against my skin, my heart still pounding from the adrenaline. Then I turned, walked back to my car, and drove home, still shaking with anger. Jamie had officially crossed every possible line. And something told me this wasn't over. Update 3. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I even had the chance to drag myself out of bed. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Jamie. Again. More texts, more missed calls, more last-ditch attempts to manipulate me into feeling bad for something that was entirely her fault. I ignored them, shoving my phone under my pillow and trying to enjoy at least 5 minutes of peace. But peace wasn't in the cards. By noon, my mom was calling. That was unexpected. I answered, already bracing myself for another lecture about family, and forgiveness, and all the other things people like to preach when they aren't the ones getting taken advantage of. But my mom's tone was different. Tired. Worn out. She sighed heavily before saying something that caught me off guard, "Your sister is a mess." There was a pause, like she was choosing her next words carefully, and then she hit me with a question I hadn't expected: how bad was Melanie last night? That's when it clicked. My mom already knew. Not the full details, maybe, but she had seen enough of Jamie's behavior over the years to put the pieces together. I told her everything, how Jamie had abandoned Melanie on my doorstep in the middle of the night, how she had lied to Daniel, how she had manipulated everyone around her to avoid responsibility. But the part that seemed to hit my mom the hardest? The fact that Melanie hadn't even looked surprised. That an 11-year-old had been left outside in the middle of the night, and her reaction had been nothing. Just silent acceptance. Because this wasn't new. This was just life with Jamie. My mom was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that made my stomach twist, "I'll handle it." By late afternoon, Jamie was blowing up my phone again, but this time, the messages weren't the usual mix of guilt-tripping and faux sweetness. This was pure, unfiltered rage. "How dare you get mom involved? She's acting like I'm some unfit mother. Do you know what you've done?" "Yeah, Jamie." I knew exactly what I had done. Turns out, my mom had driven straight to her house that morning. She hadn't given Jamie a chance to deflect or make excuses. Instead, she had asked to speak to Daniel. Alone. And that was when everything started to unravel. Daniel had no idea. None. He had fully believed Jamie's lie that I had agreed to take Melanie for the night. He hadn't known that his girlfriend had straight up abandoned her kid on my doorstep like some unwanted package. And my mom? She had laid it all out for him. Every single thing. The freeloading. The entitlement. The pattern of dumping her kids on other people whenever it was inconvenient to be a mother. The reality of what he had actually signed up for. By the time my mom left, Daniel was furious. Not just irritated. Not just annoyed. Furious. From what she could gather, he had already been having second thoughts about this whole situation. He had gotten together with Jamie thinking he was signing up for some fun, a late-in-life romance with a younger woman who would make him feel young again. Instead, he found himself stuck with a woman who didn't seem to want to raise her own kids, expected to be her financial savior while still working double shifts to keep them afloat. And now, he was realizing she had lied to him. So Daniel did the one thing Jamie had never expected. He packed a bag and left. By the time I checked my phone again, the tone of Jamie's texts had changed. She had gone from rage to desperation, like she was cycling through every possible reaction in an attempt to get a rise out of me. "You ruined my life. You couldn't just let it go, could you? I hope you're happy." The last one, though, was different. Just 2 words, "I need help." I didn't reply. A few days passed. I went about my life, ignoring the mess, letting it play out without me. And then my mom called again. Jamie was floundering. With Daniel gone, she had lost her last safety net. She hadn't just been using him for money, she had been using him as a buffer, someone to lean on so she didn't have to face the fact that her life was a complete disaster. And now, for the first time, she had to deal with the consequences of her own actions. She was suddenly very interested in being a better mom. Not out of guilt. Not out of some sudden revelation that she had failed her kids. But because she had no other choice. She had burned every bridge. There was no one left to dump her responsibilities on. My mom had stepped in, not to enable, not to rescue, but to force her to get her act together. The dynamic had shifted. No more free babysitting. No more handouts. Jamie wasn't happy about it, but she was finally being forced to deal with the reality she had created. It wasn't some overnight redemption arc. There was no big moment of realization where she broke down crying, vowing to be a better person. She was still Jamie. Still selfish. Still bitter. But now, she was stuck. And for once, she couldn't escape the consequences of her own choices. As for me, I blocked her number. I was done. No more drama. No more manipulation. No more being dragged into her chaos. And honestly, it felt pretty good.